I'm Marcia Herbert, President of the Carroll County Board of Education, and I'd like to welcome you all to our Strategic Plan 2018-23 workshop. Dr. Lockhart.
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members and staff. We got a lot of staff joining us today. The purpose of this work session is to take a look sort of comprehensively at our strategic plan. Throughout the course of regular meetings, you'll get various updates on certain pillars of the strategic plan. We had always built in that our plan was a sort of a dynamic, iterative sort of document. And as we meet some of the performance targets and goals that we've set for ourselves, or things change, a lot has changed in the last 18 months or so, it behooves us to have the opportunity to kind of look at it comprehensively and have some conversation around, sounds like I'm now on. I'm not going to repeat everything I just said. To have some conversation around the broader pillars of the plan. So we have information. Mr. Anderson's going to sort of tee it up and walk us through that. This is a work session, so questions, comments, feedback. We really want the board's feedback and recommendations moving forward. We've set aside 2 hours this afternoon, and if we need additional time at another work session, we can certainly accommodate that. So with that, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, good afternoon, board members. I wanted to go ahead and thank you guys once again for the opportunity to go back through this plan. It's been 2 years since we actually sat down and worked through it. And what I'd like to do is ask you to open up your blue folders at this time. And then on the left side, you'll see our CCPS current iteration of the plan, version 3.2.1, which was June of 2019, June 21st of 2019, to be exact. And on the right side, you have what staff is bringing today as recommendations. The top copy of on the right side will be a control document that looks similar to this. And what we're proposing today is that this will be version 4.0, and that we'll be going through and presenting our recommendations. And then obviously, just like we did 2 years ago, as recommendations are either received or readjusted based on the board's expectations or pleasure, then we'll go ahead and bring it back once again with the new iteration, and then it'll be identified as potentially as 4.1, something like that, okay? So what I'd like you to do is to refamiliarize yourself once again. On the left side is the current plan, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and open it up to the first document. That first document obviously needs to be modified and revised. That's where it's titled our strategic plan, where we have our Board of Education officers. The last time we did this, Board Member Savigny was president, and obviously now we have to make those revisions and modifications. And now our president will be listed as Ms. Herbert, and Vice President Mr. Kyler, and the other board members as being members of the board. And then obviously our student number also has changed since Evan, and that's Devanshi. So that's pretty easy and self-explanatory. The next page, if you will, is what we refer to as the board's core statement, values, and beliefs. Nothing has changed there, and I didn't anticipate anything changing there. Again, we did make a slight revision, I believe 2 years ago. Dr. Dorsey made a recommendation. We put that recommendation into the core beliefs, and that was voted upon.
Yes, I see that, connecting with students.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
If you go to the next page, please, you'll see Carroll County's public schools about CCPS, and there's been some minor revisions there. The first page on your right is titled Budget Facts. Does everyone see that page on your right? The budget facts are from this actual fiscal year 2022. And that was provided to me by Mr. Hartlove. Thank you, Mr. Hartlove, for that information. And this would be something that we would go ahead and update to give our community a more accurate representation of our current budget. Any questions there?
Mr. Anderson, I just wanted to ask about, so I noticed on the update with
Yep.
the local revenue at $205.6 million,
Yes.
that's 43.4% of the county revenue, where in the prior iteration it was 46.8%. That's on a percentage basis, that's a pretty significant drop. Are we comparing apples to apples? If Mr. Hartlove is here.
Mr. Harlow's not here right now. In this particular situation, I can find out if we're comparing apples to apples, but what I would say to you is obviously what we do know is that the actual local revenue is increased by about $13 million. And what you're saying is that the 43.4% of the county revenue, did we illustrate that in the back one? We said it was 46.8 before, so now you're indicating that this is a decline in the percentage of the local budget. John, do you have any insight on that?
I'll have to get back to you
Sure.
to be certain, but sometimes, depending on the setting, we'll look at local revenue in different ways. So for instance, sometimes when we talk about local revenue, that might include something like the county's debt service
Right.
on capital construction. So it may or may not be apples to apples, so we'll make sure that it is before we publish a final version, and we'll let the board know for sure what.
I think we need to
What we're
be
talking
consistent with whatever we did
The first time,
previously,
right.
or bring that back to the board and say, here's what it was the first time. Is that what we want to
Yeah.
make sure
So
we
I
include?
will say, Board Member Savigny, that when Chris and I were working on it with John, that I was asking him to use this as an example. So I wouldn't be surprised if it is apples to apples, but we'll confirm it.
Okay, I would appreciate that, just because,
Totally.
there've been discussions over time that, the local funding, it had tended to be around the 50% level, but there were different ways to look at it. And so I do want to just make sure that we're keeping this on an apples-to-apples basis every year, and so we can understand, because if 50% was kind of the metric that we were working on, and that is an apples-to-apples, then this represents a pretty significant decline, and I don't want to send the wrong message if
Right.
that's not the actual message, so.
Sure.
Appreciate
You're looking
that.
at about 6.4% then, right? Okay, very good. Any other questions about that? Okay, thank you, Ms. Savigny. The next page is a continuation. Please don't turn your original draft yet, because that's still fast facts. What I've done here is I've put another page in regards to the number of schools that we have, and obviously that hasn't necessarily changed, but our enrollment figures have changed, and you can see that we've decreased in total enrollment across the board, whether we're talking about total enrollment or elementary or secondary. You can see our student makeup has changed slightly. Our American Indian, Alaskan Native is what I would consider as consistent. Our Asian student population is consistent. Our Black or African American student population has increased slightly. Our white population has decreased slightly. Our Hispanic student population has increased slightly. And our Native and other Pacific Islanders has been pretty much consistent. And two or more races, again, you're looking at a 0.4% difference. So the student makeup, for the most part, I think one could say is relatively remaining the same. We do see an increase, however, in the number of students that are receiving free or reduced price lunches. And Carroll County is always the lowest, or has been the lowest among all of our counties in the state of Maryland for a number of years. And though we have ticked up a little bit, I believe we still are at the bottom as it relates to the percentage of our students that are receiving free or reduced meals. Special education pretty much has remained the same. And our limited English proficiency, I asked for an actual percentage. Historically, it's been recorded as less than 5%, but we've recorded other student demographics of less than 5%, so I asked to be placed in there this time, if that's okay, because that's something that we know and anticipate we've seen grow a little bit over the past couple of years since I've arrived here.
I agree. I think it's important to track that number specifically, because that can have a big impact
Huge.
on,
Performance.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Attendance will be on its way. September, we'll be receiving our new up-to-date attendance numbers. We won't get those until the fall of next year. You can see there, though, our graduation rates are stellar. We continue to lead, or had continued and continue to lead in the state as it relates to graduation rates. And then when you're looking at our 4-year and 2-year percentage of students enrolled, you can see significant increases in our 4-year with a mild, well, actually significant increases in our 4-year with a slight decrease in our 2-year college.
While we're on that
Yeah.
page, the student race chart,
Yeah.
in one of the update meetings, we talked about some changes in how some of that is figured, and particularly the 2 or more races. On one thing, it disappeared, then when it came back, it looked like less, now it's more. But something was said that parents can identify their children a couple different options, and does that affect these percentages?
The way that we're collecting it is the exact same way that we've collected in the past. Now, I will say to you that in some cases, a certain demographic will trump another demographic, if you will. So in other words, if you're a student that's of Hispanic or Latino race, then that oftentimes becomes the actual leading race or identifier. But in this particular case, the way we've been collecting this data has been consistent across the board.
I think to Mr. Kyler's question, maybe Cindy, you can answer this too. So don't parents or Carl, parents have a choice of the box that's being checked, correct? I think
Correct.
that's what you're getting at.
That's
That's what I thought. I thought something was said, like for instance, Kyler and Reed are biracial, but if mom checked African-American because that's
That's
where
correct.
dad's from, that's how it would be.
Yes.
Nobody makes them change it.
No, the parent selects
Okay.
which choice they would like.
Mr. Anderson,
Yeah.
do you think we should put an asterisk by total enrollment? Because it's been a very different year and pandemic. I know when everybody keeps records of some sort, that was a big drop, and I think we should put that in there because,
Sure.
to note that, we all don't, I don't want anybody to forget the pandemic.
You know, I don't think
But
we
I
will.
think that would be, I think that's the important thing.
No,
Yeah.
but in all seriousness, yes, I think we're going to have to do that in a couple different places throughout the plan, Ms. Herbert.
Right.
And Mr. Kyler, I apologize. Yes, whatever the family chooses to identify as, that's what we record them as.
Ms. Herbert, I was going to say, I completely agree. I think because potentially a couple of years down the road, they could be like, okay, well, such and such year, though, your enrollment had declined so much. But at the same time, you have to be a reminder of that was
What
because
was
of.
that? Yep, yes, that's why
Yeah.
I thought we should do that.
Yep.
Anything
Noted.
else? Any other comments?
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
just one other quick
Mr.
thing.
Bigney?
On the graduation rate,
Uh-huh.
I'm assuming that that's a typo. We're saying that it continues to be greater than or equal to 95%, right? Not less
Yeah,
than.
it should be
90%.
reversed the other
Okay,
way.
yeah. Just wanted to double check.
That's pretty
that hadn't
significant.
slipped,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next page is the student performance facts. I'm pleased to share with you all that obviously the last time that PARC was administered, which is our Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program moving forward, we've seen a significant increase in our ranking as it relates to third grade ELA, fourth grade ELA. Let's see here. Fifth grade went down a little bit. Sixth grade remained the same. Seventh grade went down a little bit. Eighth grade, we basically stayed the same. And then 10th grade as well, we actually moved up to the second spot. I'm sorry, we actually, yes, we actually moved down from second to fourth. I apologize for that. As far as our PARC scores in mathematics, you can see there that we went from third to second in grade 3, remained first in fourth and fifth. We moved up there in grade 6. You can see there that we did have a drop in grade 7, remained the same in 8, and then we actually moved down one spot there as it relates to Algebra 1.
Before you go on, can I just comment that that's really super? I mean, look at the #1 rankings for the majority of grade levels.
And just as a reminder, in the state, math was number 1 and ELA was number 2 across the board.
Yeah, and I'll also remind us, just the last one you mentioned there, Algebra 1, even though we dropped the ranking spot, we still increased the number of students meeting or exceeding the standard. So
Yeah.
somebody leapfrogged us a little bit somewhere,
Yeah.
but our students overall still continue to improve.
We actually, and we're going to talk about that in 1 minute, in our Pillar 1, we actually surpassed our goal as it relates to getting kids enrolled and passing, and then also achieving a passing grade. So doing well on PARC as well. You can see SAT participation. Ms. Herbert, you had just mentioned what about COVID. As you remember, we were one of the few school systems that were making it happen, bringing kids in and taking the SAT. So this, again, was towards, you see a lot of kids that typically would have taken it last spring that didn't get the opportunity to do so last spring, summer. So what we're guessing is that part of the actual CCPS class of 2020 we saw a slight decrease, and we're looking at that further, but you can also see there that our scores in general, our performances in general, you see a slight increase there as it relates to the total score locally.
Mr. Anderson, so this actually says a 71% participating for the class of 2017, but then it dropped to 36%?
That's
in
what I was just
2020?
referring to. So we have to look
So-
into that. So that's the number that was reported to me. So I'll get back to you on that number, but I'm reporting to you what I was able to pull at this time.
Okay.
Okay.
But we think that that is COVID impacted, but
I'm suggesting
but
that
the
right
Maryland percentage went up, so
Went
that's
up.
why it seems
Well,
odd to me that.
Yeah, if you look across it, I mean, the national percentage went down, I believe, slightly, but our percentages locally actually went up, as well as the Maryland percentage. So we'll take a look at it.
Okay. And just from a trend perspective, I was looking at the results up above, and Pat, you're absolutely right. Like, it's a great statistic to see the number ones there in so many different places. Although there's some interesting trends that are going on where on ELA, it looks like all the percentages increased, but some of our rankings dropped a little bit, which
Yeah.
makes it seem like other counties are maybe increasing at a slightly higher pace on ELA.
Or-
But I think the opposite was happening in math. So.
Yeah, and I can tell you that, so I can speak to Calvert County, who is often our competition, if you will. It's a similar type of demographic, and they are actually, they're a little bit smaller. I believe they're a little bit smaller than us.
A lot smaller.
We're a lot
Lot
smaller
smaller.
than us, and and that once again, you can have greater gains in a shorter amount of time, if you will, right? So when you're looking at a smaller end.
Okay. Yeah, because it looked like sort of the opposite dynamic was true on the math side. Where we might have actually, in a couple of places, we had dropped percentages, but our rankings improved. So,
Well, again, so I can tell you, so we looked at it, I guess, and this was written in 18. Those were 18 results. This was the 19 results. So it'll be interesting as we go ahead and take it, the MCAP in the year ahead to see where we are. I mean, I think that's really, we'll be able to start looking at some trends because essentially we're looking at 2 years right now. Your baseline year, the first time it was written, and then the last time it was taken. Okay. The next page, we get into the actual strategic planning pillars. The one thing that I want to bring to your attention is at the bottom of the page. Dr. Lockard made it clear to us that historically, obviously with COVID and even going back 2+ years, we really want to make sure that this coming year, we're spending some time on attributes of a CCPS graduate and what does that mean when students graduate from our school system and what does that mean? And so I can speak specifically to some cool things that are happening here. I know one in particular, Dr. Locker just met with a number of our students from across the school system in a superintendent student advisory, and we're learning clearly from what students are thinking, where they want to go. Yes, there's no doubt. AP is one of our measures of success. There's no doubt about it. But we also have a number of courses that are within the CTE program that are also level 9 courses. And we have a ton of dual enrollment opportunities now. And we have a ton of transcripted and articulated credits of opportunities. So we want to start looking and making it clear and promoting this and marketing this to our community of all the different pathways that we have. And when we're talking about attributes of a graduate, yes, we want kids to be taking the most rigorous coursework to be competitive and increase our school profiles, but we also want to have an opportunity for kids to see themselves in a direction that they can go. Perhaps maybe they don't want to go to that 4-year college, and that's fine. But then again, maybe they still want to do that, but they want to also get a completer. So we want to go ahead and encourage kids to have those opportunities, but most importantly, we want to illustrate it to our community about the possibilities that are in front of us.
Can I just ask, while we're talking about the attributes, remember when we had the town halls at the end, one of the questions you asked in all of those sessions concerned, what were the attributes that the community would want our graduates to have? So we have that information documented somewhere.
Yes, we do. Ms. Gaddis, wherever she is, took copious notes. But we heard a lot of themes and a lot of similar desires from the community for our students to be college, career, and citizen ready. We heard attributes like good problem solvers, good communicators, critical thinkers,
Collaborative.
Yeah.
workers.
So I'm thinking back, that work got a little bit interrupted last year. But those are the kinds of things that we were hearing, and my goal would be to come back to the board at some point and try to solidify that. And then how do we best promote it? And Mr. Anderson just gave a good example of pathways that kids can take to pursue some of those attributes so that they can be ready.
Internships and apprenticeships are also something we really want to spend more time with in providing kids the taste of it while they're in high school, to have that opportunity or have that on the radar.
I was going to ask, is there a plan to have some of those classes offered the 2022, 23 year? Obviously, we can't do it this coming year, but the year after that, where, you know, if someone at Man Valley wants to take sign language, they don't have a teacher, that they can take it somehow virtually, somehow online, whether it's a teacher at Westminster agrees to filming their teachings and then they can watch it later. And also same with some of the pathways. I mean, you have students who this is their pathway, this is what they want to do, but for some reason or another they're waitlisted, they don't qualify. Like, what do we have in place to go forward with that?
So for virtual courses, we continue to increase the list of courses that in-person students can take virtually within the digital learning labs. So that will continue.
Okay.
Yeah. And in regards to the pathways, one of the things that's awesome about Carroll County Public Schools is you have an opportunity to take essentially, you know, the state requires 21, we require 25, but really when you're talking about the opportunity to take 2 semesters of 4 courses, you're talking about potentially 32 opportunities. Whereas what we'd love to see one day is that kids have the opportunity to get a completer as well as whatever they want to do as well. It's just something really awesome to put on your resume, if you will, or application, a CTE completer. As it relates to programming, there's no doubt we have some very competitive programs. Biomedical sciences is one of them, where it is a waiting list, if you will, and a lot of our kids who are exceptional students are not getting in, when they were anticipating that they would. We also have a number of seats available, though, that are also in what your traditional, more blue-collar trades, right, that are viable skills that our students, we should be encouraging our students to take part in as well. You know, you can still have an opportunity there, too, and it's a great skill to leave with, quite honestly. I can speak from example after a tornado going through my house. I wish I had some skills that I was unable to help myself with. But the reality is that we want to continue to promote and model all the different ways. Yes, we're getting a new CTC. That's going to be awesome. But the reality is that there's still only going to be so many seats in our programs. If we want to scale it, then that becomes an investment in having, practitioners, having area, spaces, those types of things. But one of the solutions, quite honestly, Ms. Battaglia, is to start moving some of the programs back into the comprehensive high schools, and that typically may have been at the center,
Has there been discussion of possibly, like, some of the ones that most likely have the wait list, whether it's the biomed, sometimes the nursing, the physical therapy, like, is there a way that maybe those type of completers, they have to submit an essay on why they feel they should be accepted? So that way the student gets to identify, like, look, this is the path I want to go. This is what I want to do.
Yeah. So we just had this conversation, and one of the things that we were contemplating is how do you quite honestly, how do you educate and inform, right, our students and families first? Because we have a lot of kids out there that do have some interest in a certain pathway, even in middle school and 8th grade. And so what we were hoping to do was to begin to, not that we don't do that right now, we do our tours and we do that thing and we bring over middle schools. But one of the things that we'd really like to do is to better illustrate the possibilities of what you can leave with. Because I don't think people clearly understand the opportunity that sits in CTE. Mm-hmm. They don't.
No, a lot of them don't. Yeah. And I think that's some of the things is, trying to get families and students to understand, like, these are the different things. But I think a lot of what I hear in the community too is, you hear parents, well, why didn't my kid get picked? Like, mm-hmm. this doesn't seem right. This is their career path from 7th grade on. Mm-hmm. So why did one student get it versus another? So I think for ones that are extremely popular. And I think maybe we also need to maybe get our counselors a little bit more involved when it comes to the career in tech, you know, hey, okay, so if you wanted to do this, what's your backup plan? Because unfortunately, a lot of these kids don't have a second choice. They just have their heart set on one, and that's it.
Yeah.
So I think, to me at least, I mean, it'd be kind of like an interview process. Like, this is why I think I would be best fit in this program. That way you want to be fair to everyone, but you also want to make sure, like, okay, this is someone who wants to go this path, but do you want to have somebody who they really have no plan on doing this further on in life? You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, if we're going to invest, we want to make sure we are going to invest in someone who's going to take that further down the road.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes perfect sense to me. And quite honestly, this is the type of conversation that we could potentially start to have on the C&I committee that we referenced in the last board meeting. Any other questions or thoughts?
And I think to piggyback that, I think early on, the students have to be told, I always struggled, somebody wants to be a welder and somebody with a higher GPA gets in the class instead of somebody that's truly a welder. And I don't agree with that, but there has to be some kind of selection process. But attendance, behavior, there's other things I think the kids have to learn early on. You need to, if you don't do this and this, you're probably not going to be selected, and that's a good lesson for them, and they should learn that.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Okay. Board members, if you go to the next couple pages, and if you go to the first pillar, nothing's changed on the next two pages. So we'll go to the next, the first pillar. It's the green pillar. It's pillar number 1, and as you remember, this is all about providing multiple opportunities for student success. So the way that we've worked this is we've provided a narrative on what staff recommends. What I'd like to do is start off with the first recommendation, meeting with our content supervisors in ELA. Historically, we have presented goals of a percentage of students meeting 80% on the assessment. And I think that really threw people.
Excuse me.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you help me with what you're referring to?
Yes,
What page
absolutely.
you're on?
So what I'm referring to is the recommendation for Pillar 1.
Page 10.
Okay, so
Page
that's where I
10,
was, but then once
and
you
then
got.
the green
Oh,
one.
I saw you with the green chart, and I thought I
Yeah.
was.
So the
not
green chart
following
stays
along.
on your left, and page 10 will stay on your right. Then we can go back and forth. There you go.
On the green
You're doing good. There it is. Awesome.
I've gone through all this with them,
All right.
trying to make sure it's in the right spot here. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. So basically, what we've historically looked at is our local CBA assessment as well as the RI assessment, which used to be known as the SRI. One is pretty much criterion; it's locally developed, and one is more standardized. So it's great to have two different measures to identify where students are, and quite honestly, are they reading are they where they need to be when they leave third grade? And so the way that we've recorded it historically is that we looked for a percentage of students that were achieving 80% on the actual assessment. And then we started having community members saying, well, you only have 59% of your students that are reading at level. And that's, quite honestly, that's just not true. So I believe that in many cases it became a little confusing for our community members, because if you're achieving 80%, the good news was if you were achieving 80%, you had a strong linear relationship on how they were going to do on Park. That's wonderful, because 80% is pretty good, right? So there's a high there's a high likelihood they're going to be proficient, and I think that's great. But I think one of the things that was misleading to our community was that people would begin to look at that and say, well, that means there's only that many percentage of students that are actually reading at level. No, that's not what it's saying. In fact, what we're proposing now is that we'd like to propose to have an average, and we looked at the average and set the goal average based on historical performance. What we're proposing now is to have, next year, to have 83% of our students reading on grade level, indicated by the CBA, and then also having about looking at a percentage of our students that are reading at a 660 Lexile level. And again, just to give you a point of reference, when you're looking at third grade, you're looking at a Lexile level of anywhere from about 550 to 675. Okay? So when you start talking about 80% proficiency, I mean, that's a pretty solid proficiency level. And I think in the most part, when you're looking at school systems across the country, you're looking at anywhere from about 10 to 15% of the students that are going to need some sort of support. This is a
So, Mr.
recommendation.
Anderson, let's go, it was a lot of numbers over,
Yeah.
just want to make sure that I'm understanding everything. So you're saying that the proficiency level in third grade is between 550 and 675?
When you look at a Lexile, if you're looking at a reading level, it can run anywhere from 550 to 675 to say that a student is reading on level. What we're proposing is next year to have to look at a percentage of our students that are reading at a 660, which is significant, great confidence that the kids are ready to go on and be reading and being able to handle the material as you go into fourth grade, and probably, quite honestly, do very, very well on any type of.
It's at that upper end of that Lexile.
It is.
Right.
Exactly. And then 670 the following year. So our expectations are continuing to increase.
So this would be, are you saying move just to the 670 average Lexile, or have this sort of dual?
So what I'm saying is
that we track.
we continue to have a dual. We've always had both, and I think that's good. As I mentioned earlier, it's a criterion and it's a standardized piece that we can look at. The nice thing about RI is basically it's normed against millions of or hundreds of thousands of students across the country. But I also think there's great power in our CBA where we can actually drive instruction and look at how we can develop our own curriculum. So there's benefits to both. I think the power, and Ms. McCabe can probably correct me here, the power has been when you look at both, we can go ahead and provide a higher likelihood of kids being proficient on the high stakes assessment. And quite honestly, if they're not, then it becomes that physical, if you will, rather than an autopsy at the end of the year where we can go ahead and put interventions in place, which you know is a direction where we're trying to go, is to have a solid RTI model in place. It's a recommendation.
Yeah, and I understand what you're saying, and it all seems positive. My only concern is if parents were confused that only 59% were reading on grade level, now they have no idea who's reading on grade level. So how are they being communicated? In other words, if parents are confused, I don't want the perception that we're going to hide the facts from them so they're not confused anymore. We need to give them the facts.
Yeah, so I don't think parents are confused where their students are performing. What I was referring to is, so when we reported this out, the percentage, your goal was that a certain percentage of students were achieving 80% on the assessment.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at only about 59, I think at one point 59% of our students were achieving 80%. Well, that doesn't illustrate all the students that are actually reading on level.
Yes.
And what we were hoping to do, because we started having people, look at that statistic and say, well, only 59% of your students are reading at level. Well, no, 59% of our students are doing exceptionally well. But we don't have an indicator on how well all the students are doing. So I think on the reverse, I'm trying to illustrate a better representation of the number of students who are reading on grade level. That's my goal.
Dr. Lockhart?
So I appreciate the question, Mr. Kyler, and the answer, Mr. Anderson. I think what might be helpful for our community at large is as we make recommendations to our plan and as we make approved changes with the board's input, that we can work on perhaps some sort of summary update to the community about the system's goals and use that as a place to explain a couple of these things. Not in, I don't want to send out pages and pages, but some highlights that get at what this means, so that it's not left to interpretation.
Yeah, and if the board likes, we can continue to measure it as we have. I was just, I'm just taking the feedback I received, and basically I didn't want people to be misspeaking about the percentage of students that are reading at level.
Right, because I know that I've seen a lot of things out in the community saying, oh, well, this must mean that 41% of our students are illiterate in third grade or
That's
not reading
correct.
on grade level.
When I
And
first
that's
arrived
not
here,
an
I got a lot of
accurate
those.
representation. Okay.
And I think this may be a better way of measuring it, but I still think the message, like you're saying, the message has to
Better
go out to
message.
them of exactly what it means.
Yeah.
Well, I know that was a question I had when looking at this, and my question was, why aren't we staying consistent with the measures? I mean, it just seems like
We can. And again, I think we can. It's at your pleasure. I'm just trying to better communicate to the community of where our students are performing.
And I think that's what we need. We need a better communication on that. Tyra?
But I think Dr. Dorsey's right, the more
Absolutely.
consistent. We need to stay consistent unless there's a very good reason not to.
You know what we could do as well, if the board, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
I
Go
just had
ahead.
an idea. We can, yes, we could maintain the consistent measure of achieving at 80%, so those numbers remain the same, and then we could, with an asterisk or in parenthetically speaking, have our average score.
Would some of these students potentially be in summer recovery this year? And is there a way to identify, even to kind of move that into the fall as well, to see, like, getting some of them, up to pace where they need to be, whether it be after-school assistants or, even in-school assistants, and they have things to do at home? I mean, is there a way to kind of get them back up to where they need to be at?
Yeah, so I just sent out data last week to Cindy and the directors as it relates to fourth quarter data. So that's one measure, but obviously we also have our local measures in which they use to identify students for summer recovery. And then we actually went ahead and conducted our pre-assessments so we can use those standards to drive the instruction this summer. But in many cases with fourth quarter data, that data is going to be driving the invitation list for the fall extended learning after school programs. So to answer your question, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. We're looking at local assessments as well as grades and other things to invite students for the fall based on fourth quarter grades.
So you're saying, don't replace this with what you were doing, keep doing what you're doing and add this to it.
Yes, sir.
So we have the consistency, but, okay.
Yeah.
that
And we
makes sense.
collect both anyway,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah. I just want to be able to make it clear to folks that we don't only have 41% of our students reading.
yeah,
that.
yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that, with this, it would also be good, we have some of those several after-school programs that are in our schools. If students are like in ABC care or whatever, let the provider know, like, possibly like this student could use a little more help in this area, if you can help them a little bit.
Yeah. So one example of that is with Boys and Girls Club. We work very closely with them. Our content supervisors work very closely with their staff. We've also, as you know, they report their grades to us, which we've shared to you all in a board meeting. But we're working hand in hand to make sure the students that are over there, as they took on our students during the pandemic during the day as well, and they were working directly with these students based on some of the insight teachers were able to provide them. So yeah, that's happening.
Good, okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Anderson, where are we today on the Lexile, the average Lexile for the end of third grade? Because I'm just trying to understand whether setting a goal of 660 for 2022 is the right place to be.
Yeah, so I can get you the exact numbers of where we're at right now. I don't have those in front of me. But what I can say is that the way that we've typically shared the data was that that we were looking at having a percentage of our students that were reading within that Lexile, right? So that's a big window. And that was another reason why we were proposing the idea of 660 or 670 2 years out, because it's large. And so some student could barely make it into the window and be like, okay, well, they made it, and it looks very good. But there's a difference between someone that's reading at 550 or someone that's reading at 675, depending on the text and the readability of the text as well. So what we were trying to do was just to make it more measurable and illustrate it better. I can get you the actual percentages of where the kids are reading right now, but I do know that they spent time, Angie and Stephanie Dale spent time in developing the goal.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, okay, how much of an improvement is this from where we are
Well,
today? And how much difference is it really to move the needle from 660 to 670?
Well,
Right,
again,
is that-
yeah, it would be a certain percentage of students that are reading at that level.
Okay.
So
So
it would
that's
be a-
the 80, that corresponds to the 83 and the 85?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's something when you're looking at it. I can tell you that they were keeping SMART in mind, right? That A of being attainable. It wasn't something that was moonshot. It was something that this is a reasonable goal and it's an attainable goal.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So based on the board's direction, that we will go ahead and keep the measure consistent. for the next 2 years, but we'll also provide the 2022 and 2023 averages as well. The next one, number 2, is we were looking at the percentage of students who completed algebra by the end of 8th grade. As you know, this goal has been met. It was met with 27.5% of our students in 2019-20 surpassing the actual 5-year goal. And so one of the things that we were thinking at first is the answer is not to go ahead and enroll more students. Right? I mean, Freeman Rabowski would say to you, that's not the answer right now. You can go ahead and accelerate your kids and have a million AP courses, but she's going to take my AP math, or my actual calculus when they get to university. That's great. We'll take it for the application, but this is what's going to happen. So I do think it does prepare folks in many different ways, and I do think it's the right pathway. However, I don't think our goal now is to increase it to 40% of our students are taking Algebra 1. I don't think that that's what we should be doing. What we're proposing right now is that we stay the course. Lots of reasons why we want to stay the course. It's been a couple years since we've actually taken the assessment. We've also went through, again, this is the asterisk, Ms. Herbert, we went through a pandemic. We also want to go ahead and see where we are. There's going to be a new assessment also. And quite honestly, there's not only going to be a new assessment, but within the new assessment, 20% of the grade is going to be based on MCAP. 20% of your local grade will be based on MCAP, is the direction that we're receiving right now. So there's a lot of unknowns. And so what we're proposing is that we hold suit right now and keep our goal where it is of having roughly a little under a third of our students enrolled in algebra.
And this was a goal that I was pretty passionate about a couple of years ago, simply because we had some of the lowest percentages of participation in Algebra 2 versus other counties, and we had virtually 100% pass rates on the park of those students, thinking that, okay, well, that must mean we have more capacity out there of our students that could do well. We weren't necessarily getting them into, enough of them into Algebra 2. Into Algebra 1. And so I'm very excited to see the statistic that we've met that goal very quickly. I think it sort of validates the hypothesis, right, that we weren't necessarily getting enough kids into the Algebra 1 classes. And I agree with you that, for just to now make that statistic 40% isn't really the right way to go about it. But we need to see where we are on the assessments, right? Like, we will still want to make sure that, okay, of these, we've got significantly larger proportions of kids going into Algebra 1 now, but how are they faring, right? Like, if we still have 100%, close to 100% pass ratios, then maybe there's still some pent-up capacity. But if we're now starting to, some of those kids aren't necessarily ready for it, then, we may have been pushing a little too hard.
Correct, and I think that, so let's go ahead and take it again and see how we're doing, right? I think it's a testament, quite honestly, to the elementary work that's been done, and how they went ahead and re-imaged the curriculum to make sure kids were prepared. As you know, a lot got pushed down. So Mr. Hicks and his team have done an amazing job of making sure kids were prepared. Not that Ms. Swack hasn't, right, and the teachers at our middle school.
But yeah, that's where the backward mapping came into play, right?
Well, they're anchor standards all the way through. Absolutely. And so what we want to be able to do is to continue to place kids to be in a position to be successful. Moreover, also, which is really, really exciting, is that that's great, but when you're looking at the SAT, you're only looking at maybe, I'm going to say around 40% is Algebra 2, right? So yes, does it help you to take Algebra 2? There's no doubt about it, but we want to make sure kids are solid before they move on, right? So we don't want to continue to accelerate them, right? And to a point where it's not really helping them, to your point of making sure that, let's make sure they're successful, because there's lots of opportunities yet for our students. Okay. Number 3, staff recommends maintaining a priority focus area as it relates to career and technology, honors courses, advanced place in AP, and transcripted course credits. So, Dr. Dorsey, here is a recommendation. Historically, the way we've looked at it was that we had a risk variable that was different for each one of these areas. So CTE had a different risk variable. Honors had a different percentage of risk that they were looking at, and then AP Transcripted was looking at it. And it depends, quite honestly, on our student makeup of that year. So what staff was recommending was, why don't we make it comparable across all three areas? All three of these areas lend themselves to access and credit to a well-rounded curriculum. So instead of having a 6% window in one area and a 3% window in another area and a 1% window in the other area, why wouldn't we look at just what our general makeup of our student population is and expect that across the board? Whether we're talking about our white students, black students, Hispanic students, special education students. And that way we can have more, I see Ms. McCabe shaking her head, we can have better conversations at the school level than trying to remember which one was, we need to be within the 6%. And I'm not quite honest how that came up. Maybe it's the number of seats or opportunities in those levels, but it's something for the board to consider.
And Mr. Anderson, I must say, like, I struggle with this one. Just because, you know, I certainly want to make sure that we don't deny access or opportunity to any of our students for any of this. I mean, certainly, it is our goal to provide access and opportunity to all the students. But the way it's presented, it presents like a quota, right? Like, okay, we need to meet these percentages, right? So I'd like to think about it slightly differently. Like, okay, how do we meet these goals, but not lower standards in any way, right? Like if we're lowering standards to try, you can easily meet these by changing your standards, right? So I think maybe if there's a caveat in there to say, look, we're gonna try to meet these percentages, but it's by making sure that we maintain our standards, and we're just increasing access, and we're developing our students in order to meet the standards in order to get into these programs. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure that we're doing this in such a way that we're not changing the standards, because it's a very easy bar to, it's very easy to meet these.
So we have met them in the majority of the cases. Special education, as you know, since I arrived here, special education has been an area that we need to focus on. Our Hispanic student population as well. And our ESOL student population and our economically disadvantaged student population. However, when we reported out to you all, in the majority of the goals we did meet, and a number of them we did not. But again, they had, CTE was within a 1% window, honors was within a 3% window, and AP transcripted was within a 6% window. What we were proposing was this idea of, let's keep it at 3% across the board, so that we can have those discussions. What I hear you saying also, Ms. Savigny, is why don't we put a piece in there that really just disclaims this idea that we are providing access, we want to provide access to everyone, no matter what identifier where you reside, right? The reality is this starts very young. This is measured in high school, but quite honestly, by the time the students are going to middle school, they're set up on whether or not they're going to have the opportunities, what you were referring to earlier. So we're doing a ton of work now and really focusing on, as you remember, performance academies, of looking at students and looking at data and saying, well, why aren't they in a more rigorous coursework if they are doing well on the COGAT or any type of RI? They're doing well. So why are they still in that lower group? So I hear what you're saying, Jason. We don't want to just place students in there for the sake of meeting our goal.
Right.
We want to make sure we are challenging everyone, but I think also we need to make sure that we are as a school system.
I think we do need to make sure that we are, but we don't want to just push kids into certain things in order to meet these percentages, right? Like, they have to be ready for it, or they're not going to be successful.
I agree with you, and I don't think we do that. I don't think we're guilty of that as often as we are guilty of the opposite, to be quite honest and frank with everyone. I think there's many times where students have illustrated that they can do well, and we didn't push them. You know what I mean? So I hear what you're saying, and I completely agree that we want to make this objective, but you got to show me. You know what I mean? You have to show me with the performance. I don't think that it should be we create a large window so we can meet our goal at all.
Right. I also think that we need to track it at the same level. Like, I know we talked about this several times in the past, but these categories don't really match up quite right with, you know, how the state tracks things and how we track things on some of our other student metrics, right?
Yeah.
Like, so,
This goes back to, the way the plan was written, and so we can change it however you want. If you want to go back to the state demographics that Mr. Kyler was talking about earlier, then we can certainly run those reports as well, if the board please, wants to.
That's why I've had my card up, because I look at us, and we had student race, and we started out with American Indian, Alaska Native, and then we forgot the 730 Asian students that aren't in there at all, and I think we need to do something here.
Yeah, I'm not quite certain why it was written that way, but we can certainly do that.
This is a negative. You know, I mean, we need to redo this or fix this, or it's
Right.
like a quota system. Yep.
And I've been worried with and I brought it up before, like, for instance, our GT program. We have a lot of kids that aren't being challenged because we're twisting numbers around, and we just can't do it on any level. We need to track the performance. And I agree with you. You know, the people, they have to be at the right level where they can afford, where they can perform, the students do, but you can also stick a child into a place where they not perform and do a negative, and we can't do that just to make our little charts and graphs look good.
No doubt.
but I think a lot of the changes that you're working, you know, through with G&T classes or advanced academics, is really going to get at my concern, right? Like you're talking about how to develop the capacity. So it's not necessarily the label of whether you put someone
Correct.
in GT or not. You're
the
building
capacity of the
capacity
instructor.
of our teachers,
That's right.
and how we group kids in the elementary grades to make sure that everyone can live up to their fullest potential.
Absolutely.
So
The ones that most deserve it should be in it, regardless of this.
right.
And I think that's what sort of got us here. You know, when we started those performance academies, we were really looking at the data and getting staff members to become advocates for some of these kids who weren't given the opportunities.
Oh my goodness, yeah, I can speak from one example I've been using over and over again is economically disadvantaged students, and I'm sure Ms. Lilly will be fine with this, but at Mount Airy Middle School, where historically they've had one economically disadvantaged student taking algebra in 8th grade, this year they had 7, and they've all done extremely well.
So it's giving them that access and that opportunity. Not that we're trying to meet quotas, so to speak,
yeah.
Right.
but we are
Yeah.
certainly concerned about
That's what I was gonna ask,
giving
like,
everyone the opportunity.
are we
So-
making sure like our counselors and career planners and mentors and teachers are identifying these students and then going to administration and going, hey, I really think this student could be challenged, like they need to be challenged with this, so this is a good thing for them, or, they're looking for a career path, identifying again that student going,
Yeah.
you have this amazing skill for, when I see you in tech and you're building, like, did you ever think about like welding or engineering? Like, I mean, at least setting that idea and that path for that student to look into it. I think that's something we need to make sure we're doing. And I know we already ask a lot of our teachers and our staff, but I think it's just, if you notice something, you just kind of like, even the student themselves would even be like, wow, they noticed that
Yeah.
I have a great skill for this.
That's what we heard with our student advisory. It was the relationship and someone taking an interest in what they were interested in also and moving forward.
And that goes back to that connection that
Yep.
It's
the
everything.
adults are.
And then now having the data
Yes.
dashboard, we have the metrics that we can look at on a regular basis that are very objective, and the principal can see them.
And while you're making all three the same numbers, you do have a fairly wide range. So in theory, whatever, CTE might be at the high end of the range, honors might be in the middle. It doesn't mean they have to be identical.
That's right.
That's why you've got the wide range.
That's right, because we're not filling a quota.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir.
Exactly. It's not easy.
No, it's not.
But I think
Especially when you have an
to
actuary at the table.
sorry.
Yeah.
But I think to your point on 1B, I guess, right, like you just want to make sure that your messaging is correct and we are actually tracking the right things.
Right.
It's not necessarily just the percentage of the kids that are in these classes or these pathways. It's how successful are these kids
In that path.
in that pathway.
Right, and what evidence do we have that they will be?
Right.
Okay, the last piece, when I arrived here, it was made very clear that Mr. Brick and I would go ahead and create the actual chart of performance, the goals of about 3% increase. That's going to remain the same, board members, that we don't have any plans of revising that. We'd like to get back into that assessment, if you will, that test. And as as we've built this upon of having about a 3% increase each year, 3.5% increase each year, that again was to making sure that everyone by, I believe, 2030 per ESSA would be achieving proficiency. So that was the goal, and how we backward mapped and provided appropriate goals for annual goals. So we didn't have any plans of changing that because, quite honestly, we've only done it one time since we did that work. We've only assessed one time since
Yeah,
then.
we've kind of been at a disadvantage there for,
Yeah, we need to get back on it
Yeah.
and see how we're doing.
get some consistency
Yeah.
with, a couple of years under our belt.
Yep. And that goes back to the trend. We want to look at some trends.
Right.
Okay, pillar number 2. It's the orange one. And it's page number 11. Not a lot of recommendations here, a few. What we're looking at is keeping recommendation number 1. Staff recommends keeping our Community Advisory Council goals the same of 75%, right, Ms. Gaddis? I am pleased to share with you that we are at 70% right now, with 2 years to go. So she's going to bring it in, there's no doubt. But in all seriousness, we do have a great representation of a variety of our schools in different areas of our county that take part on that on a regular basis. And I know a number of us have presented there. In regards to 1B, where it's the ESSA Climate Survey, we've only administered it once. We'd like to go ahead once again, and if the state is going to be administering that climate survey again, we'd like to have that information. What we do know is that was written into your plan. You wanted that into your plan. But as Mr. Streaker and I have talked, it's limited in regards to the insight. And when we get to Pillar 4, he and the team will be sharing some ideas that we have as it relates to having better perception of how things are going for our students. But we'd like to go ahead and keep it in there right now and to go ahead and see how we're doing as it relates to the climate survey, the ESSA State Climate Survey, because that's part of the report card.
I was going to say, it's important to have that there because it is an indicator of the report card.
Right.
And I think that's valuable information.
Correct.
Unfortunately, we've only had one administration of that, but
Correct.
the state has every intention of continuing that this year.
That's what we understand.
Yep.
Ms. Battaglia?
So I know one thing I think, we hear a lot about is more school involvement in the community. Sometimes there is a lack of other community members participating. Our PTAs and PTOs, they do struggle on constants with trying to help out their school community. Just like we do with the rec councils, we have, Ms. Gaddis sends out the email monthly, like different things that are happening at the rec councils. Was there any more discussion or ideas regarding like the PTAs or PTOs submitting their different fundraisers they may be having in different areas and sending that out monthly? Because that way that gets the community as a whole in the county involved in another area. So they know different areas, they get to know people. I even think
So-
with that would even be more participation in
So
TAC.
there's nothing, I think, right now that we do as a system that we send out. So in other words, in some situations, a school may be doing some sort of event or fundraiser that may go out. However, where the power comes there is that the Carroll County Council of Parent Organizations now, PTAs, PTOs, other types of school organizations, they meet on a monthly basis now. That essentially is a third-party entity that we support. We're invited to present and those types of things. But that's really where they share ideas and get insights from one another and taking it back to their buildings and steal shamelessly from one another.
That's mostly PTA, PTO presidents and
Yes,
their
presidents, yeah.
exec boards, right?
Yeah.
Right.
What I'm saying is there a way to make sure, get that idea out there to them? Like, hey, we would like to have Manchester help support Eldersburg, or Eldersburg help support Manchester for a night, And part of our plans is, having family engagement. Well, nothing's better than family engagement than going out to eat for a restaurant night, and you're supporting another entity in the same
That's a good
sense.
point, yeah.
So I think, that just kind of, it's just an idea that potentially just have out there. I mean, it never hurts.
All right, Ms. Gaddis, I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you about that, but I understand. So making it more of a county type of awareness
Yeah.
of things that are going on in different buildings.
Yeah.
You got it, yep. Okay, the other piece I wanted to share with you, item number 2 on page number 11, we have successfully integrated the language line, which is going to be solely used by our families. And that's something where this year, I believe it was as of March, we had 796 calls used from our families using the language line. We still use our other services, and we're still reaching numbers that have far surpassed what we've recorded in the past with COVID. So there's still thousands of interactions that are taking place with requests for folks at school level to get an interpreter on the line, and then Ms. Burns will go ahead and make sure that there is an interpreter or a community liaison that's working and supporting that teacher. So we're talking several thousands of interactions every year, but in particular, what we do know is there's been about 800 opportunities where the language line has there's been a record of it being very beneficial for our families to be able to communicate with the school system.
But we need to thank Patty Burns.
Absolutely.
She does a terrific job.
Yeah.
And she doesn't leave one stone unturned because
She's got a great staff,
if
too.
she needs something, she'll say, I need someone here, or come to this, and she's spot on.
She's very responsive to our principals, too.
Yes.
Makes it
She's-
happen.
Yes.
So the next piece, the Cultural Expo, Ms. Savigny, I believe in the past, we've talked about the difference between activities and impact, right? So one of the things that we're recommending is to change. Board members, we had over 800 attendees to the last Cultural Expo 2 years ago now. And that was phenomenal. We far surpassed the goal. But we're trying to make it more impactful now. And so what we're hoping to do is to identify, number one, is to spend more time on vetting the communication and the content that's going to be at the expo, and focusing more on what our system goals are. And then once that content is vetted in these breakout sessions, then what we're hoping to do is to have some sort of evaluation at the end that teachers in particular who are attending are going to be identifying exactly what they're going to be taking back and how does it help the strategic plan and how does it help the their school improvement plan at that time. So that way it's not just, we're just not identifying random content or topics for our sessions, but Ms. Jones has a vision now to make it more discrete and more focused for system level employees. There's no doubt that we have other local colleges and higher level institutions wanting to partner with us, but right now we're still keeping it intimate and keeping it us right now. The next one is
Excuse me, before you
Yes,
go on,
ma'am.
just thinking about that evaluation.
Yeah.
So at the end of the session, teachers would sort of self-reflect?
yes.
And maybe what, during the year or at the end of the year, would we also bring that reflection
It's a
back?
great idea. Ms. Jones and I have just really began that conversation in regards to making sure that the content's vetted, making sure that it's appropriate, that it aligns to our strategic plan. So yeah, there's no doubt that could be a follow-up, and that could just be part of teachers' professional growth to making sure that they implemented it, right? In some cases, I know Ms. McCabe is looking at setting goals, also individual teachers setting goals and schools setting goals. That could be aligned to it as well. So whether we're talking about SLOs or whatever, were we successful in our implementation?
Right, and were we able to implement A, B, or C? Or,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a great idea. Okay. I appreciate everyone's patience as I'm going through my notes. Special Education Family Support Nights, I can tell you this with COVID, Mr. Shockney did an exceptional good job of having not only CCAC opportunities, but town halls. I believe we had over 300, Nick, we had over 300 300 support nights, opportunities going on across our system. And as Ms. Herbert knows, being on CCAC, how important that was through this past year and a half of making sure that our families of students that were receiving individual education plans or programs were getting the attention and response that they were looking for. This was another opportunity. We'd like to keep the goal the same, though, because we are, once again, moving back into something that's a little bit more familiar. And quite honestly, not that I'm saying we can't continue to have virtual events, because I think that is here, and I think that's a good thing. But I think there's no substitution for the face-to-face events at the schools and the opportunities for families to engage with one another. Ms. Herbert?
Tammy Chisholm did not miss a beat.
No, she didn't.
And I wanted to give her a kudos too, because I got email after email. This was going on, that was going on. Parents, we can do this. We're going to do this virtually. And she didn't forget anybody. So kudos to her also, because that was a big part of that. And Mr. Shockney's group, because Tammy didn't. I mean, she was spot on all the time with those students and parents.
Okay. Board members, the next item is specific to Title I families. And as you recall, the last time we reported out on this, I think Ms. Savigny, you're asking Mr. Anderson, what was the holdup there? Well, what was happening when we wrote this goal is each school was essentially collecting and tabulating their own data in whatever way that they were looking to do. And in one situation, we weren't able to accurately present and share the data with you at one of our schools. So Dr. Hart and teams of our liaisons at each of the Title I schools, as well as the principals and administrative teams there, have been spending some time in developing with our tech services team. I didn't mean to forget them because they were a huge part of this. Detachment 1.1, which is in the right side of your folder as well. You can see the development document. It's a separate document, and it's attachment 1.1. It's right behind the recommendation document. And so what I want to draw your attention to, and you'll have time to look through that, and if you have any specific questions after that, I'll certainly get you an answer. But the one piece that I want to draw your attention to is the outstanding work of tech services by getting the insight from the schools of making sure that we can identify the event type, the audience, the time of day. The reason why I think this is significant is that schools then can begin to make better educated decisions in regards to what time to have events, right? What, in regards to the student groups, days of the week, what day of the week is best when you're looking at data? Where did you have the largest number of people attending? So that's what we want. And so now we're going to have one area within our system that can collect that information and then record that information, and most importantly, present that information so schools can make better decisions in regards when they're planning their community events.
Who's inputting all that information?
So it's most likely going to be the actual liaison at the Title I school who does the family and community involvement.
So we did fix the
We fixed
glitch
it.
or
We're fixing it.
whatever
It'll be
that-
live September.
Okay, because was it programs not talking to each other, or just had to redo, or?
Yeah.
I mean, so that it doesn't happen again?
I can say that it was something that the way that we collected data for a number of years was probably not the best and most efficient way of doing it. So this is a more contemporary way that we can go ahead and make sure that we have this information as it's happening.
As it's like live?
Pretty much. I mean, at least the next day, once it's
Okay.
input.
I was thinking about how the volunteers would always sign in once they would come to the office. And I thought, boy, rather than having one person having to go back and input all this data, it would be good if parents could sort of sign in.
As they're coming in.
As they come in.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd have to have several, around, but that would be one way of collecting it instead of
Yeah.
putting it on someone else to compile.
Compile and put it in. And you're right, that would be obviously far more efficient. I think one of our big steps now is to have a consistent, accurate collection of volunteer data in our schools, which I think is something we've been working on.
Because again, even with having the parents sign in themselves, I mean, it's still consistent.
Well, yeah, and quite honestly, that's how you tabulate the number of hours and all of that. So when we get down to recognizing our volunteers, we want to make sure that we have a way of doing that. I got it. It's a good idea. Okay. And then the next page, if you will, page 12. Board members, one of the pieces of, one of your objectives was to, objective 2.3, CCPS partners with local government businesses and agencies to support student learning. The recommendation now in handout 1.2, you've seen this before. This is a very iterative process. It's very much a draft right now. It is not fully baked. However, it is an effort right now of compiling all of our partners in our school system and identifying those that we have formal memos of understanding. There's been a ton of work that's been placed into this over the past 2 years. And number one, having some uniformity and regularity to how we write an MOU, how we manage our MOUs. We've found MOUs from the 70s that were clearly done on typewriters that hadn't been updated yet, so we want to get that one updated. But the reality is we're trying to...
Some kids don't know what a typewriter is.
I know one.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
don't.
My sister had one. She's a lot older than me.
People don't know what a typewriter
So anyway, in all seriousness, this is far from being solid. However, what I wanted to illustrate to you, and you've seen an iteration of this before, is for us to be able to speak intelligently to the idea of the number of formal MOUs that we have, having that reciprocation of service going back and forth, what we offer, what the organization offers, working closely with Adam and Ed's group of making sure we have indemnification within the document and working closely, as close as possible as we can to having a contract. I've had several conversations with a number of people on staff. I know Mr. Streaker and I spent some time last week. We do have partnerships that potentially may not be an MOU. For example, a number of us serve on boards around the county that we may not have an MOU with, but we still are partners with in some capacity. So we want to put that out there. And quite honestly, we have a number of people that have retired. We want to make sure we have the right relationship manager identified within our school system. And then at the top, you can see how we've calculated the number of MOUs we have that relate to each pillar. So we can see, like, do we need some extra support as it relates to a specific pillar? You can see pillar number 1 has essentially one partnership that really supports that right now.
Solely dedicated to.
Solely
right,
dedicated to it. Pretty much all of them obviously are pillar 2 because that's the goal, but or the pillar. But we just wanted to present this information to you to give you some insight on what we're thinking so that we can then have this as a priority focus area of saying we have this many partnerships, and not just that we have this many partnerships and activities, but this is the impact that it has on our strategic plan, and this is where they support our strategic plan.
I'm very excited for this. I know Mr. Anderson, me and you have discussed this before in a different way. I would like to see at some point that extend with this, whether it be quarterly meetings or, twice a year, in either one of the high schools with a representative from one of these organizations. I like to call it Resource Entity Alliance Development, READ. So it's just a way that each entity can bounce off each other. Hey, we need help on this, and another entity be like, oh, we can probably help on this end with that. And I'm just happy to see that we have this compiled, so that way we can okay, if we do something for Veterans Day, that we can reach out to the Veterans Department. If we do something with CARES from the Health Department, we can reach out to them. So I think it's very important that we do have this, and I would love to see it expand a little bit.
Yeah, and I know you had a vision, and Ms. Gaddis and I met last week with a number of staff members about potentially having a volunteer, or not a volunteer, excuse me, a partnership opportunity where we bring our partners together at a venue, and Dr. Locker could have an opportunity to speak specifically to our partners and talk about the benefits and obviously the value that our partners bring to us. Whether that's specific to student achievement, whether that's mental health, whatever our current issues are, and really just accentuating the service that they provide and recognizing the service that they provide.
Interesting that you mentioned the veterans, because that's our latest, thank you, Mr.
That's Mr.
Kyler, our Carroll County Veterans Independence Project.
So we'll be signing that with
right.
them on July 1st.
And they were very excited about that. I was at their dedication, and they mentioned
I heard
how
you were
Mr.
there.
Kyler had come back with Dr. Lockert's signature on the one form, and that we're good to go with that, so.
July 1.
We're scheduled for July 1st, right?
Good.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So, and Mr. Anderson, this is a fantastic start, and like you said, we've seen iterations of this over
Yeah.
time, right? It's getting more robust every time we see it.
Absolutely.
But to your point about, not just putting down the number of MOUs or partnerships that we have, but how impactful they are. Like, has there been any thought to how do
we measure it?
how do we measure like how impactful they are? And is
Yeah.
there like a rank order of we spend this much resource internally with this group, and this is what we think we get out of it? Or I'm just trying to think, how would you kind of
Yeah.
measure the impact?
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you, we haven't, those are fantastic ideas. We haven't even gotten there yet. What our cognitive energy has been directed to compiling it and making sure that we have record of all that's going on and having it
Right.
hopefully in one place. The other piece is to look at, to your point, of where do these support our strategic plan? And then the next piece would be, how do we measure effectiveness of the partnership? Is there value? Is there a return on our time and investment with this partnership? Or is it something that we have and that looks good optically, but it's not really providing a great return with student achievement at this time, but there still could be a benefit to it. So those are the things we need to work on next.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that, and it's a process, right?
Huge process.
It's
yeah.
definitely a process, and we're getting along that. We're going down that path, the journey. But to your point, we have limited resources. We're always going to have limited resources. So how do you most effectively use those resources? So if there is something in here that not that I want to poo-poo any partnership, right? But if there's a lot of time spent on something, but it's just optics.
Yeah.
Rather than truly impactful to student achievement, then we need to make sure that we're focusing our resources in the right way.
Achievement and well-being of our students and staff,
Was the Chamber of Commerce on this list?
It should be, if it's not, we may not have this may be one of those examples where we don't have a formal MOU, but we have a fantastic partnership with them. So, if the board would like to see that being done in the future, we can certainly generate that.
Absolutely. I mean, again, another, wonderful resource that
Yeah.
if we want students to kind of look into internships and local businesses, I mean, that's another wonderful entity.
Yeah.
They could give recommendations of different
Student
businesses.
service hours,
Yeah.
internships, apprenticeships, no
Yeah.
doubt. Okay, board members, thank you for your patience as we work through the Pillar 1 and 2. We're now moving on to Pillar 3, where I'm going to be happy to turn it over to Mr. O'Neill because I'm tired of talking. I used all my words today.
Get a drink of water.
Yeah,
Jason.
thank you so much. So I'll turn it over to Mr. O'Neill.
Thanks, Jason. Pillar 3 is the blue pillar in the current working version of the plan. And on the packet of changes, it starts on page 13. And Pillar 3, as you know, is the pillar that addresses developing and supporting a successful workforce. And the objectives are all listed in either of the two documents, so we're not suggesting any changes to the pillar or to the objectives that you had originally outlined. The focus areas, as you know, have long dealt with recruiting and retaining a workforce whose demographics reflect that of our broader school system community, our student demographics or our broader community demographics, and then also trying to achieve a retention rate among our non-majority employees that would be equivalent to the retention rate of our majority employees. And the frustrating truth, as you know from hearing me and others report this out twice a year, is that especially in the last 3 years, those numbers have been overall pretty stagnant, which doesn't mean that nothing has happened. Lots of things have happened, and lots of folks have worked very, very hard on trying to move those numbers in a more rapid and positive way. But at the end of the day, while the decimal points may have changed a little bit here or there, overall, our staff demographics remain the way you can see them in either of the two plans or either of the two documents. We put them in both places. And so, while that may be difficult, if you're me or others or all of you who have this as a goal and who think about this and focus on this and work on it, we don't want to run away from those statistics. They are our statistics, and we need to deal with them, and we have every obligation to try to improve them up to and including legal obligation, which has been in state COMAR since, I guess, the time period of it.
71.
Mr. O'Mealy would know 1971 specifically.
1971.
Um,
13A.07.05.01.
Correct.
He's on that page right now.
There, he's
I am indeed.
there. So we're not suggesting changing or removing or modifying that part of the plan. We'd like to keep the statistics visible. We'd like to maintain working on our staff demographics as a common shared system-wide goal. But we did spend a little bit of time trying to think, what can we do to add some whatever the plural focuses, focus areas. How could we add some focus areas to Pillar 3 in addition to the ones that have been there that maybe could help move that needle a little bit more quickly, and also to help elevate what's in Pillar 3 from more of from always being that broad goal that everyone would have to some focus areas that are a little more actionable for everyone in the organization, or especially for the leaders of the organization, from everyone at this table throughout CCPS. And so what we're proposing on page 14, which would be additions to what's on page 13 of the handout, 3 new focus areas that we think are very measurable, very attainable, and something that we can easily measure and report out to you on the 2 times a year in which we report out on Pillar 3, if not more frequently, or at least the data could be made available more frequently. The first one would be that we recommend a new focus area that CCPS will offer 25% more open contracts to minority teachers than we did offer to minority teachers in the preceding recruitment year. And this has been, you can actually pan out from just recruitment of minority teachers to recruitment of all teachers. This has been something that I believe, have been at a great disadvantage at for the last decade, the decade surrounding the Great Recession and the years that followed the Great Recession of year-over-year budget reductions. We have not been for that time period, we were not for that time period in a position to offer the number of open contracts that our neighboring school systems could offer, because we could never run the risk of having more open contracts out there with folks who were then committed to us and we were committed to them than we would have available positions or FTE when we got to the new school year. We've been very limited for many years in how many open contracts we could offer. That's not been so much the case the last couple of years, and looking forward into the Kerwin years, that shouldn't be anywhere near the limitation it was for the greater part of the prior decade. And so, this would be a focus area we would like to add that we feel like is attainable, but also it's a focus area that would drive the underlying strategies to make it happen. If you can't meet these metrics, then that's going to force Mr. Diaz and his team and others, he's here today, it's his first day, and me and Steve or Dr. Lockhart and others to say, okay, then if we're not even able to meet the metric of offering that number of open contracts, then we have to figure out the strategies to get to qualified candidates in places where we can make those offers. The power of an open contract is that it locks the school system into that qualified candidate, but it also locks that qualified candidate into the school system before they have an opportunity to be interviewed, vetted, and offered a contract by someone else. So, Dr. Dorsey.
Just refresh my memory, the time frame for the open contracts, they can usually begin as early as?
Historically could begin in some ways as early as mid-year, because there are mid-year college graduates, people who are completing their degrees in the fall semester. But certainly when you're on the recruitment trail in the spring, when candidates are going to be graduating in May, you can be meeting with them. You can look at their transcripts and have a record. And many systems do this, but we kind of do 2 levels of interviews of every candidate, so they'll be fully vetted. We're not just going to, for any candidate, we're not just going to walk around and say, hey, would you like an open contract? You'll have gone through 2 levels of interview, but we can say, hey, we're really interested in Patricia Dorsey, so while we're here at this venue with her, we're going to consult with some folks and then bring Patricia Dorsey back in and say, hey, Carroll County Public Schools really would like to have you, and we're prepared to make that commitment here today. Please sign.
The open contract is not a new
I know.
concept.
Oh, no.
And, you know, like you described, we're at a disadvantage, well, in this day and age, particularly as people can shop around because the demand is so great. It helps us, for all candidates that we offer open contracts to, get the best and the brightest early before they can shop around and continue to look and take the whatever best deal that exists out there. And for lots of reasons, you know, I think it's something that could really help us just in terms of locking in quality folks early.
And I know we've talked about that over the years, because again, it would seem like by the time a vacancy would occur over the summer in a particular school, by the time you would look at the pool of candidates still available, you know, a lot of the top candidates were already spoken.
Correct, and that was extraordinarily frustrating for the better part of the prior decade, because we were in such a, you know, some of you were here, you were at least active community members who were aware of what was happening each year. We wouldn't know for sure our final budgetary figures until the very, very end of the process, and for us in some of those years, that meant knowing exactly how many FTE we did or did not have for the next year. And so we could not offer many or very, very few open contracts in those years, while other school systems continued to do so. And Dr. Locker's correct. This isn't a new strategy by any means. I was doing this in Queen Anne's County many years ago now. It's just that we've been limited here for a while, and we're no longer limited. It's not a strategy that we wouldn't be employing. It's just that, you know, relative to trying to address the priority focus of our staff demographics in this plan, we'd like to isolate this component of offering open contracts to measure it annually from year to year. So that's the first one of the new recommendations.
I have a two-part question.
Okay.
And I will be the elephant in the room to ask this, because it has been on social media, there's been a lot of buzz about some things lately. The first question is, when we get applicants, and we have, you know, we have a whole, let's just say we have a whole stack, okay? The assumption is we are taking the minorities and putting them in one stack and taking the others and pushing them aside. That is the assumption. And again, this is per social media, okay? So I want us to make sure that we put that to rest. That's not true, correct?
That's not only not true, that's next to impossible, and I'll try to explain why.
Okay.
You want me to hit
Yep, go
those
ahead and
now?
hit that one first.
So one of the things we actually are suggesting be removed from the plan, because it hasn't been something that, it's a nice idea, and the data would have been helpful and perhaps meaningful to turn into action. But one thing we really can't do is the existing focus of increasing, well, not so much increase the number of minority applicants, but the performance measure of identify the number of minority applicants interviewed and the percent hired. Legally, you cannot ask for you cannot ask a candidate to identify themselves by race or ethnicity until they're hired.
Okay.
What you can do legally is have an EEOC voluntary information form that has to be distinctive from the application. So they're separated, whether that's literally with paper or virtually in an online application system, and then therefore it's impossible to necessarily match that up. Like, I can't then go back and say, well, this form is attached to this person. So legally you can't even construct that scenario. And it's also one of the reasons why that's been next to impossible to achieve, and why we're recommending its removal, because that leaves you only with the notes of trained recruiter interviewers at various venues to try to capture those data. It really can't be captured. So I'm not sure where that would originate from, and that's not true just for Carroll County. That's true for any employer in the state. So no, that can't happen.
I was just asking because,
yeah.
you know, there's been a lot of discussion, you know, because we do, look at retention rates and hiring minorities, and there is discussion on social media that, you know, they're just hiring minorities first and then going after others after
Sure.
that. So I just want to make sure that everyone understands, we go through a hiring process of here's the applicant, and then we do the interviewing and we go from there. We want the best, obviously.
So every candidate, any candidate for a teaching position is going to be twice screened, if not more. They're going to be screened by somebody with a content background.
Okay.
So for instance, one of Angie McCausland's supervisors, and then they're going to be screened by a school-based person or a school-based administrator or a person with a school administration background. And so I want to, say two more things to that, to whatever that is that's out there. And I'm not trying to be in any way flippant about it, but if that's true, then we're doing a woeful job because our numbers have not moved at all. And secondly, just to be clear, since that question's come up, we'll offer open contracts to a full array of candidates.
Okay.
It's not that we would only offer contracts to minority candidates. It's just that this particular focus area would then apply to moving those data, but we wouldn't limit the offering of open contracts only to a certain type of candidate.
Okay. And again, it was just because these are things that are being talked about on
Sure.
social media, out in the public. And I think I don't know why and I don't know how. I don't know if it's because of things that have happened this year, but I think we just want to make sure that the public understands that we're not dividing and we're not going after one group versus another to fill a percentage rate. Like everybody gets
Correct.
interviewed the same.
Right,
Right.
and as a building administrator, the building administrator and the supervisor of the content area get together and select an applicant pool that you want to interview for a specific position. And again, in my experiences, you really don't know the race or the ethnicity until the candidates really come in to be interviewed.
And can I ask a follow-up question to that? Because if the information truly is separated, where you've got, the EEOC information versus the application, so you don't know when you have this, when you're making the offers potentially, or that you're bringing people in as part of the interview process, you don't know at that point in time whether someone is a minority or not.
Correct.
So,
You know for sure when you meet with them and interview them.
You could, and again, you don't like to make assumptions, but sometimes, you can look at the colleges that were attended or the high schools that they came from. But again, other than that, you really don't know. Because, even the
Sure.
historically black colleges and universities have white students and other students
Absolutely.
attending.
So maybe I could give a couple of scenarios in which this could happen. So Carroll County Public Schools recruitment team is at a recruitment fair somewhere, it doesn't really even matter where. And as part of that recruitment team that day, CCPS recruiters that day, there's both a content supervisor and a school-based administrator who are there. And the content, candidates just walk up and express interest, and then you start interviewing them. So just for the sake of playing this out, the content supervisor is the first person to conduct an interview, and they say, oh, wow, Marcia Herbert is really strong in this content area. I'd really would recommend her. We can then set up a time so that eventually the school-based person could also do an interview. And if they concur, then it's possible to offer Marcia Herbert an open contract that day even. And that does happen. That's probably not the most common way it happens, but that is one scenario in which this could happen. Probably the more common scenario would be we go out on various recruitment trips, or not. It could just be an online application and then we screen here. But another example could be we're out on a recruitment trip, and Mr. Kyler, who's one of our recruiters, and Mr. Kyler is a school-based administrator. That's his background. But he does an interview with a candidate, and he says, this person's really strong and solid. I think they'd be great. I'd love to see what the content folks say. Then we arrange for a way in which here the content supervisors or a content team member can interview, and then having both of those things concurred, we could say right here in the second floor, we would like to offer you an open contract. And again, that could be a white candidate, that could be an African-American candidate, that could be a Hispanic candidate, that doesn't matter. We want the best and most qualified we can get, and we'd like to be able to get back a little more consistently to being able to make those offers as soon as, or as early as the counties around us are able to do that.
And John, I got my contract in 1973.
There you go.
You know, you really are interested in the best candidate for the assignment, because the last thing that you would want would be to say, okay, you know, we're just going to forget all about what knowledge you're bringing to the table and how you present yourself as a prospective teacher, and, you know, just say we're hiring somebody just for, you know, the sake of saying, you know, we're increasing the diversity on our staffs. I mean, we don't want to set people up to fail. So we do want to make sure that we have qualified, the best qualified person for the assignment. And it is, you know, regardless of race. And again, like I said, you know, by the time we get the candidates at the school level, a lot of times, you know, we really are just finding out when we meet them. We go out and introduce ourselves, and we see who the candidate is and how they're presenting himself or herself. So, you know, it's not that we know ahead of time.
And Pat, I couldn't agree, oh, I'm sorry.
And I was just going to say, and to go a step forward, we're out at an interview, or Dr. Dorsey interviews them at the school. The application package, if they haven't been made an offer yet, still does not say race or any of that stuff. That's still not allowed on it. So you may know, but the next person that looks at it won't. It's not like you write across it, oh man, this guy's whatever. So it stays pretty confident. I know it's the same way it is in our world. We can't, that's not part of the interview process.
Correct. And so, you know, just to be as clear as we can be, we're not suggesting that some process occur with minority candidates that doesn't or cannot occur with all candidates. It's just that this is a focus area, and this is another focus to attach to that, to try to do something to move our data in a positive way. And our student data is outpacing our staff demographics. We are falling further behind, if that makes sense.
And then, oh, I'm sorry, but if I'm just one more thing, back to this. I like the idea. So what you're talking about adding is some metrics we're going to see, but on things that you were already doing. And I kind of, because to me, when you look at okay, it's 4.7%, we're going to make it 5, that's like, what's that mean? You know, if we only hire 50 people this year, we can't physically do it. But I like these kind of sub-goals, and that we'll see those. Sorry, I'm done.
Oh, no, that's fine. No, I was just going to say, I like seeing the sub-goals as well, but I completely agree with what you said, Pat, in terms of we want the best qualified candidates. It doesn't matter who they are, what they look like, what they're, we just want the best qualified candidates. But I struggle with the way this is worded, because again, this is worded kind of like a quota, where it's saying, okay, we're going to put out this number of open contracts to minority teachers. And it sounded like you're not even going to know these things until after the fact anyway, right? So is this I struggle to put it in these words. Like, I understand what we're trying to accomplish, but this is worded as a goal, much more like a quota. Like, we're going to make sure that we offer, 25% more, and 16 versus 20, over the coming year, versus approaching it from the perspective of, we just want the best qualified candidates. And I think that's what's driving the perspective that you're talking about on social media, Tyra.
Yeah.
Because it's stated in a number, like, we're going to
Right.
offer this many more.
We have this diversity goal, and it's like, okay, well, what exactly are you doing? Are you putting, not hiring, those that are non-minorities over minorities? Like, are you picking and choosing? And I think, and unfortunately, that is the perception that is out there right now. And I just wanted to lay it to rest. Like, I wanted to be like, no, we want the best and the brightest, no matter what. But we're not cherry picking. We're not putting, one pile ahead of another or anything like that. And I think that's something that needed to be addressed and said and understood.
Right, and I think if we're more deliberate in saying, okay, this is how we're going to achieve this goal, without lowering standards, without passing on some higher qualified candidates, as long as we say that that's how we're very deliberate in saying how we're going to achieve this,
Right.
versus it just being a number that we're trying to hit.
Yeah.
Mr. Kyle, you had your
And,
card up
and,
first.
and I understand, and you're way more metrics than I am, but to me, and I'm not big into goals and quotas, but what this is saying, we know there are qualified people out there. What it controls is maybe where we look for people and what places we go to look, and I think we need to see that.
How do you recruit? How are
Yeah,
you gonna
exactly.
recruit
I
in
think,
order to
yeah,
meet
yeah. I don't
this?
think it's like, well, only 5 people applied, so we got to take all 5. It's no, we need to find 10. We need to find more, and I think that's what this does. But I understand what you're saying. It looks like goals and quotas, but
Right.
I think you've got to have that push.
Right.
Right, and that's what my question was, how are we going to increase the candidate pool?
Exactly.
Right, so that we know that we're not.
Well, I think what's been said, looking at the venues that we recruit at. And again, we have to keep in mind that all of our fellow systems are in the same position. Most really are trying to increase their diversity of their staffs. So if we're at a historically black college and university and we see quality people and, the capability is there for the open contracts, it sounds like that's what we're going to be going after, and I certainly would support that.
Mr. O'Malley.
I think what you need to be careful in distinguishing is the difference between recruitment goals as set forth here and set-asides. A set-aside would be where you say, we are going to have X number of seats reserved for minority candidates, and we're not going to consider non-diverse candidates for those seats, and that would be illegal. You can't do that. But what we're doing here is aligned with what COMAR requires. And COMAR says local boards of education shall develop and implement plans and procedures for the attainment of racial balance at the various levels of the public school system reflective of the composition of the population of their respective jurisdictions. And we're not anywhere close to that. And what these are, as I read them, these are goals to increase the percentage of offers, to increase the percentage of filling diversity candidates in our positions. But we're not using any particular set number. We're not saying we're going to have X number of teaching positions that will be reserved for.
We're not guaranteeing it's going to be successful.
Right, and you have to have the threshold criteria of being a qualified candidate in the first place.
Thank you. All right. Did you have another question?
I'm good.
All right.
I'll move to the next one, which is number 3 on page 14. And again, this is along the same lines of trying to build some more hands-on ownership of the plan for, particularly for the leadership of the school system. We've pulled for you, or for us and for you here in the chart, we broke the school system into different areas or segments, and quite frankly, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out what would be the best way to kind of lay out the data, and I'd certainly be open to different ways of looking at how we've organized the school system here. But we've broken the school system into different areas, and I don't want to read through those, but you can see those. We've tried to collect the organization in certain ways, and then have the total staff, and then of the total staff, the minority staff. And we're suggesting that each area of the school system have a goal in each year of the plan of filling 5% of all vacancies each year with a qualified minority candidate. And this, to us, is something measurable, something actionable, and something a little more specifically focused for all of us to own and be accountable for, than just saying we need to improve the overall demographics, which again have not changed really substantially at all over the last 3 years. And so it would, and at least in my mind, it would promote the focus that's been Pillar 3 for these last few years from being well, that's what Pillar 3 is, to, this is the kind of thing, if you look at it this way, that Mr. Wernig would have these data, and when he has his principals meetings with elementary schools, that this could be something that's talked about among all of the other things they talk about. For me, operations, that would be a component of my staff meetings. How are we doing with this goal? And, to use me and my part of the world as to continue that example, okay, well, how many vacancies have we had this year? Where did we recruit? Where did we advertise? What do we need to think about then differently to increase the number of candidates we're receiving? That sort of thing. So that's the proposal for a new focus area, which on this sheet is number 3. I'll pause for discussion or questions on that.
Mr. Kyler?
And kind of back to where we were talking, and I'm not sure I'm right, but I'm looking at this as recruitment and trying to find qualified people. Where I get upset, which is where I think we go sometimes with the students, is we say, well, you're not quite qualified, but we need to go ahead and put you in that. That's wrong. But I think, like Dr. Dorsey said, as a principal, don't give me somebody that's not qualified, period.
Right. It's
But
problems all the way around.
and so that's why I look at this a little differently, I think, than what you were saying, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
Okay, Ed, are you okay with that language in terms of?
Mhm.
Okay. And so no, I don't want to cut anyone off. Okay, then the final item we propose is meant to try to get at retention, and we've, again, whether these things end up in the board's strategic plan or not, this kind of work is going on anyway at all times, and so we spent a lot of time the last couple of years, especially me and Ms. Baptist before she left, and her staff members, trying to figure out a measurable strategy that we could use to help achieve the goal and the plan of achieving equity between or the same rate of retention of minority staff members as majority staff members, because that's another set of data that hasn't really changed. And how we tried to go about that for the first couple of years, if you think back to the reports on Pillar 3 every November and then in the spring, we tried to go after it aggressively with exit surveys. So when employees would leave us, we would track them down and say, would you please fill out this survey and let us know? And what that amounted in is not a very good return rate at all. And we didn't really get a broad spectrum of feedback. You tended to get a handful of respondents, period, and then you got people who either really liked you and were sad that they had to go, but some circumstance in their life changed, or people who felt like this wasn't a good experience for them and they wanted you to know that. But you didn't get feedback that you could then turn into something actionable. And so we spent time trying to say, okay, what can we do differently? Because this isn't really giving us what we need to develop some strategies. And we, through the National HR Professional Organization, SHRM, we were able to locate an employee engagement survey. Now, this survey has nothing to do with minorities. It's just an employee engagement survey that could be administered to anybody. But this current year, we administered that survey instrument from SHRM to all of our minority staff members who are still with us. And said, here's an anonymous survey tool. We're not going to ask you to put your name or your location or anything like that on it, because we'd like to get the highest response rate possible. But please fill this out, and then we'll be able to take from that some meaningful information, hopefully, that could help retool or help us think about our retention strategies. That survey has been administered and just closed, so we're in the process of compiling those data. We did look at the questions, and some of the questions are very specific to your work location or your administrative team, those sorts of things. So we tried to identify the survey from the question from the engagement survey that was most holistic. And the question we've identified simply asks, do you think your work environment's comfortable and supportive? And so that would transcend any specific location or that sort of thing. And it's a Likert scale, is that right, Jason? It's a Likert scale of 1 through 10, with 10 being the highest level of satisfaction. And so we're proposing we take that one holistic question from the survey that we administer this tool every year, and we try to increase the percentage of our incumbent employees who are telling us with a 7 or higher that they find working for us to be a comfortable, supportive environment. They can also have free-form comments they can put in if they wish to.
Is it an electronic?
It is.
Form,
It was
okay.
an electronic survey.
And I read this, I thought, now how often do we do just a regular survey in this building for comfortable, supportive work environment? Or when's the last time, or when, I can't remember, that's why I was just curious, that just hit me when I said.
Sure.
Not only just for minority employees, but when do we, I don't know, when's the last time we've done this here?
We used to do a climate survey, and then for a few years,
Right.
the governor's.
I know we used to do this, and that's
yeah.
why I didn't,
The governor's
need
office.
to know.
Yeah, Ms. Herbert, I know when my first year here, Dr. Lockhart, I believe you sent out an inventory to all the different departments where we received a report on, I think there was operations, it was schools, it was.
Right,
wasn't
yeah,
it?
I think when you.
Well, that was, but that was more for principals when I was trying to, learn about the culture and climate and what supports you need.
Right.
But I remember years back.
We used to do that all.
Yeah, we
you
used to-
used to do that all the time,
Well-
and I just didn't know if.
So the governor's office
get-
used to
get the feel,
administer a
right.
statewide tool called the TEL survey. I forgot what the acronym
Yeah.
stands for now.
TEL.
But the governor's office, that hasn't been
Right.
administered in
It's not a bad
some
idea.
time.
It gets a temperature,
Right.
it gets a feel of what, what goes on, how everybody is here. I was just curious.
Sure.
I mean, I didn't know when, that's why I put my card up. I didn't know when that goes, or how you do it, or who makes that up.
Yeah, so obviously the MSDE survey is actually taken by employees as well as students as well as families. So that'll be insight also that we'll be able to gather as it relates. But as we all know, and what we're not really confident on is basically the actual questions that are being asked. We get insights in regards to actual domains. However, it's not as I guess illustrative as it used to be that we'd be able
Right,
to
'cause
see
it's
by
nice-
school.
Right, it's nice to find out the climate of this building, because I think this one gets forgotten. I know we do all a lot of to the schools, but, I know if I was in some of these right now, they probably wouldn't get a good score because they thought they were worked to death. But I think we need to do that.
Okay.
I think it tells you the temperature of what's going on, the climate. And you want a good climate, so everybody, working together, and, I thought of that while I was sitting here.
And I know
Looking.
schools did have their own
Right,
climate
school- I mean,
surveys that
we
they would
always
do.
did.
And,
But it'd be nice to see it, for us to see exactly what this school feels, or this school,
But I don't want to forget this building
now. yeah.
also. And John, to your talking about exits, they don't want to do it. They're done with.
Right, they're
They're
gone.
done, they're gone, and it's a shame that doesn't happen, because you really want to know.
We do want to know, and then we want to be able to do things with
Right,
it.
to improve. Yeah, Mr. Kyler.
Yeah, and I think your point is well taken on looking at that as much as we can confidentially, but just looking at the numbers you have here, it's strange, the minority percentage in elementary schools is only 2.5, it's almost double that in high schools. Is that because of the environment? Is that because of the applicants available, and for some reason, there aren't a lot of minorities? And, it struck me odd that elementary seemed way, way lower than all the rest. And, but what's that mean? And maybe that would tell us what it
Right,
means.
Right.
Well, one thing, I'm looking nervously at my boss because I'm using up all the time here, and I don't know what to do
Yeah,
with
we
that.
have 5 minutes.
And it's all your fault.
But I'm sure it will be. But
It's an important topic, though. Go ahead.
It
Okay,
is your
so,
fault, Mr. Engel, but we'll go on.
So I think, a couple of things just for clarity, how these numbers break out for the 3 school levels. These are not just teachers. This is all staff.
understand.
So this would be anybody who works in a school. This would include, for instance, custodians or food service employees. And so to some extent, that could that could just at this moment skew one way or the other. Other than that, the elementary schools, there are more of them, and they ultimately have more folks, and so moving the percentages there is kind of a somewhat smaller microcosm of the overall challenge we face with our staff demographics. Dr. Locker, do you?
Devanshi.
Oh.
And I don't know if this would be a focus area or a goal, but I think that improving cultural proficiency of the staff overall should be a goal that we need to work towards, because this was discussed in the Superintendent Student Advisory Council, as well as what I've heard from many students, that oftentimes certain biases or comments made by teachers in the classroom, even if they're made in ignorance, can have significant impact or even harm minority students and reinforce certain views on all students. So either improving or measuring cultural proficiency of the staff overall and teachers, I think, would be a good idea.
Excuse me, I do want to say one thing, Devanshi. If you go to the next pillar, it talks about promoting a culture of respect and civility. Is that what you're getting at?
I mean more in the context of implicit bias or microaggressions in the workforce itself rather than all students. And this could overlap between the next pillar as well.
Right, and I also says welcoming culture of diversity in the learning and work environment. So I think that might be in the next pillar.
Just think with the third objective of the successful workforce, this could tie into that as well.
And I think what you're saying, the strategic plan, it all meshes together.
Absolutely.
And what's happening on the next page affects this, affects the results
Right.
of this. And I think that's a good point.
Good. And we can certainly have some conversation as it relates to the survey data that you were talking about, Mr. O'Neill, with, I know Mr. Streaker is going to talk a little bit about that sort of thing for the next pillar and looking at central office in our schools as well as a possibility.
I just know it hadn't been done for a while. I just thought, take your temperature of the water. Never hurts.
Okay. Good. All right.
Should we continue?
Yep.
Okay, so board members, moving on to pillar number 4. This is broken up between Mr. O'Neill and Ms. McCabe. The first portion is that we're pleased to share with you, as you're aware, the Safe to Learn Act has been met, fall of 2020. So now Mr. Williams, Mr. Pierce have made a recommendation. Staff recommends the implementation of the annual school safety evaluation. You have an attachment there. If you go to that document of the recommendations, it says 2AI. I'd like you to strike the parentheses at the end of that. It says see attachment for sample evaluation tool 1.1. It's actually evaluation sample 1.3, and I'll turn it over to Mr. O'Neill.
Sure. So one of the good news items from the original version of the plan is that all of those things that were related to the Safe to Learn Act or the security program in schools were met well ahead of time, and so we'd recommend removing those items under the first priority focus area as having been achieved. And then Mr. Williams, Mr. Pierce, and others, the members of your Security Advisory Council, which includes Board Members Herbert and Board Member Battaglia, have spent the last couple of years as part of their charge saying, we've deployed a nice security program in our buildings, which includes technology and hardware, and now multiple years of various forms of training for staff. And where that advisory council is moving is more to, okay, now how do we assess the effectiveness of the program in each school? How well is it running, and how well is it being administered, and how much is it part of that school's culture? And so this is a draft, as Mr. Anderson said, but this is an example of what an assessment tool might look like. It's also an assessment that we are required by state law to complete of all of our buildings as well, so it's not just something extra to do. But we would suggest administering the tool, gathering a baseline, and then using that to measure not just all of the things that we bought and deployed or the training that we completed, but how is that taking root within our schools and other buildings. The second item before
Excuse me.
Oh, sorry, Dr. Dorsey.
Go ahead.
Okay. first of all, I think kudos that we've implemented all parts of that Safe to Learn Act, because I can remember a few years ago when 3 candidates were really trying to delve into the Safe to Learn Act and to see all of the items that were there, and to know now that they've all been put in place is really great. Now, when I look at this document, this attachment 1.3, I had a couple of questions. One concerning page 34, under number 23. It talks about lockers assigned to students and staff should be required to always be locked when not in use. So I question whether, again, that's something we're going to be doing or not, or,
At the elementary school, we don't have locks on the lockers. So
I didn't know whether you were changing that or not, about requiring it at this point, or?
No, in most cases, we can't lock the lockers at elementary school, and nor would we want a first grader trying to unlock a locker.
Well, right,
Right.
because again, we don't have time to constantly
Right.
deal with opening lockers for
Right.
kids. So we're not going to be requiring.
Not at elementary.
Okay, so at the middle and high school levels, they will be locked. Okay.
Some of the freshmen have a hard enough time as it is with combinations.
Yes.
I mean,
Okay, and I guess for the unassigned lockers, again, the teachers, even at the elementary level,
Right.
could lock those.
Right.
If they would need to. Okay.
all right, so here's a general question. I know when I visited schools in the past, I would always take note on how they let me into the building. Did they, hello, can I help you? Or do they just buzz and let me in? How are those things addressed? Like, you know, if I were to go to a school, and of course I would notify Dr. Locker right away that, hey, this is what this school did, you know, are those things addressed immediately, or, you know, what goes into that?
So there's a protocol that all schools need to be using when they let someone into the building. And if that protocol isn't being followed, then usually John or I are made aware, and then we contact the principal, and that's how we address it.
There's an overall security procedure manual that was developed with the Security Advisory Council. And that council, by the way, a person I didn't thank earlier when I was thanking everybody who deserved credit, would include Sheriff DeWeese and his command staff, members of whom sit on the Security Council. So anyone who's in a position in a school of controlling access or egress, that they have had access to that procedure manual and have been trained appropriately. And so if there's a question, they would certainly call Mr. Williams or Mr. Pierce, who's with us tonight, and he can come forward if he would like. Or if we heard a report of a concern, then we would, as Cindy said, one of us would address it. And then they do, you know, they do spot checks, and they do evaluations, and they do walkthroughs. And it's not to play gotcha. It's just to say, you know, Larry Ferris used to say that the interest in security relates to when the last event occurred, and as you get further from the last terrible event, then it's sort of an inconvenience for people. And then when there's another event, everyone's kind of, and so this is just about sort of making this part of our culture too. And for people my age, and maybe not even quite my age, this isn't something we dealt with in school so much, so it's unfortunate and it's strange, but we've invested in our program, both in terms of equipment and technology and training and procedures, and so we just want to say, okay, how are we doing with making sure this is successfully implemented? And so we'll do reminders, and we'll let the directors know how it's going in the schools.
Are there bike racks at the schools? I see that's one of the questions about the designated bicycle parking areas. Do you have that?
It's on some.
That's back on page 43, and whether they're being monitored or observed.
Some of them will, but not necessarily all of them.
Okay, and on page 44, are students issued school ID badges? Are students going to be required?
Yeah, middle schools and high schools, they do.
elementary, will they be getting those too? Or?
No.
Okay, that's what I wondered about the elementary. Okay. And on page 45, the very top question, I think we'll need to reword it so it's a yes/no question. We're asking about the type of two-way communication.
Right. So that's not a yes/no question, the way
Right.
it's worded.
Yes.
And on page 47, are we just, we're just referring, I would think, to the health room under the high-risk classrooms and areas where we're talking about the medication and the sharps?
We're talking
Yes,
about the nurse's office.
the health suite, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, just the health suite. Okay. And that was it.
Very good. I will have Mr. Williams and Mr. Pierce make that one change. Keep going, Dr. Allen. The second item is unchanged from the current, or the working version of the plan, and that's the Facility Condition Index, which is, as you know, one tool that we use to measure, and that you see each year when you approve your CIP, and then for the December Pillar 4 report of how the current CIP request, as you've administered or as you submitted it, would move or not move the the FCI in a positive direction. And so we didn't take that out because that seems to be something that the Board of Ed has had interest in having there. But so I defer that one to you. If you want it to remain, it certainly can. And if you like to not see it or see something different, then we would obviously make that change.
I don't know about the rest of the board members, but I certainly see a lot of value in this, especially with setting expectations with the commissioners, because for years, a lot of our buildings were allowed to kind of fall into disrepair, which got us into a bad
Bind.
spot from capital improvement project perspective. And I think just kind of setting that baseline of understanding with 40 buildings in the system, in order to keep things safe and keep pace, you've got to infuse this much capital into the system every year in order to keep things up to pace and not fall behind again and get in that situation. So I think it's just very good to keep that expectation out there of this is the amount of capital that needs to be infused every year.
And we're currently set at 31, right, for the FCI?
Right. And I think that what we saw in the last round was that we're gonna be okay with that for about 5 years, but then it's gonna, once we get done with East Middle and Career and Tech, but then it's gonna kind of trail
back
off
up.
again. So just to keep it in the forefront that everybody.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to move on to number 4. For this one, the staff recommends that we create a tool for measuring the welcoming culture of diversity, respect, and civility throughout CCPS. You'll remember when we reported on our referral data, one of the things that we stated at that time is that besides referral data, we would like to have a way to be able to know how all of our students are feeling about their schools, not just look at referral data. So this would be a way for us to do that, so that all students would take a survey and we would know not just a small percentage of how folks are feeling, but get a bigger picture of how our students perceive their school. And then we'd also like to look at taking a look again at our bullying, harassment, intimidation, discrimination, and hazing policy. It hasn't been revised since 2016, so we'd like to take a look at that, possibly revise the policy and the regs, and also make sure that we retrain our staff out in our schools on the policy and regs to make sure that they are being used appropriately.
Go ahead. No, you go
I was
right
gonna
ahead,
say,
ma'am.
I'm glad to hear that because I know we have been hearing a lot lately regarding, some think that bullying is acceptable for one but not for another, same with harassing and discriminating. So I think it is a very good idea, and it needs to be known that, it's system-wide. It's not one group of students versus another. It is system-wide. And we do need to make sure that we are holding students and staff accountable regarding anything regarding bullying, hazing, and discrimination.
Yep.
I do have one question. It says bullying, harassment, intimidation, discrimination, or hazing. If we have a racial act, and I don't think that as bullying or fighting or anything like that, and then I look over here with promotes a culture of respect and civility, where does that go between Judy and this? You know, where is that? You know, where does that fit in? You know, with the racial incident, you know, they're not fighting, they're not bullying. Where do we put that?
I think, Mrs. Herbert, you have to start with the statute, because our policy
Okay.
is modeled.
Right. I just wanna make sure we get all
on
this
the statutory requirement that was
straightened out.
enacted years ago, with a model state board policy and a requirement that each local board have one. And there's a definition, and in part of that definition, it talks about where the bullying, harassment, discrimination, hazing, et cetera, is motivated by an actual or perceived personal characteristic, including race, national origin, marital status, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ancestry, physical attributes, socioeconomic status, family status, or physical or mental ability or disability. And so within that broad definition, you hit on some of those particular areas.
I just want to make sure that was,
Yeah.
you know,
Right.
covered.
Yeah.
Right. And this is for students and staff, correct?
Well, the statute is talking about student bullying. The statute is in the section dealing with students, but yeah, I think our policy covers staff bullying. It really, anybody can file a bullying
Absolutely, and
complaint.
to Vanchi's earlier point, that
Right.
we want to make sure our staff is knowledgeable and up to date on the policy that's existed for a long time, to cover all those things you just talked about. And it's
Right.
actually on page 2. You read right out of it, sorry.
So, no, that's fine. So, Mr. Streaker, you're in charge somewhat, but then Judy's in charge also. So you all have to work together on that?
As painful as that may be for her,
All right, so I do have another
I
question.
just want to make sure that, you know, that we have this, so people understand,
Right.
you know, that we're doing our job.
What about social media? I know we've had discussions regarding First Amendment.
Well-
Where's the line to draw on that?
Cyberbullying is a form of bullying, and there's no question about that. The question that the Supreme Court will be deciding any day now with the case out of the Third Circuit goes to what extent can a school system discipline a student based upon the student's off-campus online communications. And in our circuit, the Fourth Circuit, the Kowalski case out of Martinsburg, West Virginia, says, yes, we can. But the Mahanoy case out of the Third Circuit, where the student had an F-bomb tirade because she didn't make the varsity cheerleading squad,
Right.
tends to go more towards the student First Amendment protected speech angle. And that case is going to be decided this week. We're going to get a decision maybe tomorrow, maybe on Wednesday.
Because again, social media,
Yes.
we heard a lot of it this year. Other people heard a lot of it this year. You know, we need to, if we're going to be asking our students not to do something that they can be potentially punished for it, the same needs to go for adults. Yeah, we can't, you know, we want to set the example, obviously,
Right.
that this is how you should act on social media in any form.
Well, people that we have jurisdiction over.
Right.
So we don't have jurisdiction over non-students, non-employees.
Right. But that's the thing too, I think we also want to make sure we don't have, because you may have that parent that's a volunteer Unfortunately, I would not be comfortable with having that person being a volunteer if they acted in a not very well way online. I mean, I think it's something we need to make sure we,
And every case has to be examined on a case-by-case basis.
All right, Devanshi.
And beyond blatant explicit acts of discrimination as defined in the policy, I think we also need to look at, again, implicit bias and microaggressions that may come up in educators and students, and develop goals for how to address those things, whether in the classroom, through extracurricular activities, or et cetera. This could be like any manner of different goals, like professional learning for the staff, or just even doing like a culture weeks or certain like seminars for the students themselves to be exposed and just talk about these different things.
Ms. Savigny.
I just did have one question about, so you're recommending this number 4, pillar 4. Does that mean that you're recommending taking out the behavioral statistics that
No.
we had in there? You're
No,
saying?
we're going to keep that, and then we're going to put on top of that the survey that we develop.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that this wasn't in lieu of the, because I still think that there's value
Right.
in measuring the behavioral pieces.
Mr. Kyler.
And I wanted to make a point, and reviewing this and updating it's great. I really like something that Dr. Lockhart has said the past couple meetings. We want everybody to treat everybody with respect. I get wound up, we get so into the why. What if a teacher, his wife smacked him at breakfast and he comes in the mood and takes it out on the first person he sees? What if a kid, his father beat him up in the morning, and so I'm going to walk into the building, and whoever that first person is, black, white, green, taller than me, littler than me, I'm going to hit them. And it has nothing to do with the motivation. That's still bullying, and we still need to address it just as much. And I think we get too wound up into the why of it, and you need to know the why of it to fix it. But bullying, it's everybody, and we need to do something about it with everybody.
needs to stop.
So, board members, those are our recommendations to any potential revisions of the plan. What we were anticipating doing at this time was to take the recommendations and the suggestions from the board, go back to our teams, clean up the recommendations that we brought this evening, put them actually into the plan like we've done in the past, revise the actual plan that sits online right now with our tech service team, and then bring that back to you most likely in August, as we've done in the past, for your review and essentially for action to make sure that we take that moving forward. Does that
And-
sound like a plan?
And I want to thank everyone for the great dialogue. It was a great
Yes.
work session.
Yes.
Dr. Lockhart?
Thank you. I just want to clarify, Devanshi, I heard what you say as it relates to, made some notes here. Let me get to that real quick. As you talked about implicit bias, microaggressions, all those are forms of bullying and harassment. I think that'd be worth some more conversation. And I think perhaps it's something that we could have some conversation about when we come back to make sure we're all talking the same language and understand exactly what that means as we consider how we want to make revisions here. So that would be my suggestion. Okay, and again, as Jason said, we bring all these ideas back, the board goes through it all again before we adopt 4.1.
Hopefully. I mean, we went 3.2.1 before, so maybe it goes a little bit further.
What's the
Mr. Anderson, could I
timeframe?
just make one
Sure.
final comment? There were staffing facts that were included in the original, in this 3.2.1, very early on. There were, under the, sort of the fact sheets, there was staffing fact information on here, but I didn't see anything
Was
with
it in the
regards to that.
original one that wasn't in 3.2.1, or did I miss it?
No, I see it in 3.2.1. It's on,
Pages.
it's on page 5, the bottom of page 5,
Oh, I see, yes.
staffing facts.
I'll bring
But I
those.
didn't see
I'll bring
anything
them.
in it, okay.
So we have to update that, yep.
I had like 20 people look at it. No one told me that.
Okay,
He wanted
and
to see me.
thank you all, and that ends our work session. And now we,
To move into close?
yes, now I need a motion to move into closed.
So moved.
By Ms. Pataglia, second by
I'll second.
Bigney. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Into closed.
Please
Thank
state the
you.
reason for joining us.